and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host, Greg Moffitt, and today I'd like to present the latest episode of my movie and TV review series, Hauntology and Dystopia. Now, today we're going to be looking at a couple of movies. First of all, from 1985, Lifeforce. Let's cover there, so you can get one without reflection on. That's better. Yeah, so Lifeforce. And from 1978, the classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Got different lighting set up today. It's harder to actually get a good shot. So, turning first of all to Lifeforce, it's a sci-fi horror film, very effective one too. I say released in 1985. It was based on the 1976 novel by Colin Wilson, The Space Vampires. Now, there was pressure when the project started. I mean, Space Vampires was going to be the title of the film also, but there was some pressure from the studio to change the name to something that sounded a bit more cerebral, a bit less schlocky, because let's face it, Space Vampires sounds like pure B-movie fodder. All said and done, as we'll find out, it might have been better if they had called it just the Space Vampires. But anyway, they went with Lifeforce, which when you get into the film, you can see where the name comes from, but it doesn't say a great deal to a potential audience. Space Vampires, incidentally, was one of a number of novels that Colin Wilson wrote in an attempt to do something Lovecraftian, as in H.P. Lovecraft. Someone, I think, challenged him to do this. And the series of novels that he wrote, including Space Vampires, are very good. Lifeforce was directed by Tobe Hooper. Now, he's notorious, or famous, however you want to put it, as the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He also directed Poltergeist, or, well, there's questions to, how to what extent he did completely do that project. And also the original TV series of Salem's Lot. That's now been re-emerged in the culture again in a new version. Also working on the film, writer Dan O'Bannon. Long list of projects from him, but popular movies that he was involved with as writer. Alien, the original 1979, Total Recall, and he also did some work on Star Wars. The basic concept here is fascinating to me and touches on so many areas of interest in fiction and in, metaphysics and in so-called real life. And it's the bringing together a couple of central ideas, and that is one of an ancient evil, just the idea of evil as something pure that exists in its own right. It isn't something neutral or potentially good that's gone bad. It's just something that exists in and of itself, pure evil, however you want to conceptualize that. And marrying that with the space, the alien invasion idea, and the idea of the universe out there potentially being somehow malevolent, or at least elements of it being malevolent, is very disturbing. I know Thomas Sheridan has spoken about this recently, because our popular impression that we're given is that the universe is completely neutral and has no interest one way or another in our welfare or survival. If that turned out to be not the case, then that would be, as I say, deeply disturbing. So a human space exploration project is underway in close to the Earth, and they stumble upon what's evidently some kind of very strange alien spacecraft, which, get this, is 150 miles long. Even just the scale of the craft somehow speaks to the scale of the concepts. And the very interesting design, actually, of the craft, and it really is quite alien. It's a little bit like the design for the sort of U-shaped craft that H.R. Geiger came up for for the Alien films themselves, the original two. And it turns out these alien beings are shapeshifters, and they can assume presumably any form, but in this case, human form, which is what they do in their efforts ultimately to take over the Earth. And the early part of the film is taken up predominantly with what we say are space scenes. So, a lot of exposition takes place off Earth, and it's arguably a little bit too much, and it's a while before we get down on Earth and things really get going. Um, Now, how to describe this is a film that brings together many elements. As I say, the idea of ancient evil, the idea of alien invasion. There's zombie-like elements here. The undead. There's elements of possession, elements of replacement. Almost like a cosmic horror version of replacement theory about indigenous um, Earthlings being assimilated into or taken over by stealth by beings who are not what they appear to be, alien beings. And um, the effects in this, because it relies heavily, obviously, as you might imagine, on special effects and puppetry and you know other prosthetics and sort of the main thing about all the elements that are included in the film is that they're real. We're not looking at CGI here. So overall, they're very effective. There's some really, really good work in the film. Occasionally a little bit creaky. So it's one of those films where you have to kind of slight suspension of disbelief from time to time in the way that you would do with some Doctor Who episodes. But it was a big budget film, and you can tell. Bearing in mind, again, 1985 CGI was very primitive. So they managed to do a lot, and they're trying to bring together a lot of different elements. And the idea behind this was that it would be a mass appeal sci-fi film, and of course, it never really turned into that. It's one of the classic ones where it later attained a cult following. Um, so it's an uneven film in terms of production, even though overall it's a very high standard, but there's moments when it kind of lets itself down. But as with Colin Wilson's novels in general and Space Vampires and his sort of Lovecraftian style work in particular, it really is about ideas and concepts. And that's quite often I find in TV and movies that maybe creak around the edges a little bit in terms of production and effects or even acting. Not saying that this has those issues, certainly not the last two. Um, that it's the concepts that carry it through, that how it makes you feel, how it makes you think about yourself and the world and the cosmos at large. Some of the best work in the film is towards the end, when you have a sort of zombie apocalypse destruction of London, which is really well done, really well done. Not set in London, incidentally. And that's probably the best section of the film. There are elements here of Nigel Kneale's Quatermass cycle of stories, a clear influence, and also the work of John Carpenter. And in fact, if you're a fan of Kneale or Carpenter's work and you haven't seen Lifeforce, I would recommend that you do. If anything about what I've said piques your interest, check it out. I was also reminded when rewatching it, I hadn't seen it for many, many years, of a video that I made, a vlog that I recorded during the pandemic period, and that was called Are Humans Being Harvested? So if you see Lifeforce, go back and check out that vlog and look for parallels, shall we say. It's called, once again, Are Humans Being Harvested? So that from 1985, ladies and germs, is a Lifeforce. So we shall turn now to, as aforementioned, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, this is a remake, as I say, from 1978 of the original 1956 movie of the same name, which many of you may have seen. It is a sci-fi classic. For my money, this is even better, considerably more effective, and deeply disturbing in a way, really, that only the original only kind of hinted at. It's the same story, but with some crucial differences. Perhaps the key one is that for the setting for this remake, it was moved from small town America, the original, into the big city, and that this is done for very important reasons. And we'll come back to that shortly. Um, Now, this film stars, amongst others, Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum in an early appearance, and Leonard Nimoy, of course, famous as playing Mr. Spock in Star Trek. I think Nimoy felt quite rightly that he'd been typecast in his role as Spock, and he hadn't done a great deal of other work that was put before mainstream audiences. So this is something he was trying to address in taking this role, and he's very good in the film. This is great, disturbing, unsettling um, uh, performance. So, without going over the complete synopsis of the plot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I mean, if you have to just go away and have a quick look at the wiki, but it's a classic alien invasion by stealth, as it were. And again, like Lifeforce, we're talking about replacement by stealth. We're talking about human beings being replaced, in this case, by body snatchers, copies of individuals, um, as a way to take over the Earth. And of course, it all hinges around um, who's real, who's human and not human, who's a pod person, who's not, who can we trust, who can we not trust. So the elements of paranoia um, play very largely in this production. So once again, you've got the aliens come to Earth, in this case in a seemingly innocuous form. Um, uh, People start to notice unusual flowering plants appearing all over the place, and they're quite pretty, but they're not of a kind that anyone recognizes. And but there's new species get discovered all the time, but for it to be so widespread across urban areas is very unusual. And it's interesting. There's an interesting twist here in that the alien invaders, their initial form is a plant, a flowering plant, and so they come in the form of seed pods. Basically, the plants themselves um, uh, emit material, shall we say, that when it comes into contact with humans, begins to assimilate them, take over their body, and eventually, well, effectively cocoon them in a way, very much like in the movie Alien and Aliens, and transform them into a copy of the original human body, but with the alien consciousness inside it, devoid of all the characteristics that made them human. And again, that's where the tension comes uh, in the story. I was reminded quite strongly of Color Out of Space, the H.P. Lovecraft story, recently made into a movie, very effective movie, which I also recommend. Hopefully, I'll get to. Nicolas Cage stars in that. And yeah, so Lovecraft, we're looking at here cosmic horror. Once again, the idea that beyond the limits of the Earth, we are not meant to travel far, is some kind of primeval, malevolent force, in a way, suggesting that if we remain on Earth, it's in our best interest. We should just stay here in our playpen. It's not safe to go outside. Outside. The as the plot begins to move forward, and individual protagonists begin to notice something strange about their family, their friends, their loved ones, their spouse, or whatever. You start to use phrases like they behave in a strange mechanical way as if not fully human. Well, it's exactly what they are. They're not remotely human. Um, the phrase pod people is used, and you perhaps can see where I'm going with this. It's another film that when I rewatched it, I was so struck, so many jaw-dropping parallel moments with the pandemic period. It's quite uncanny. Um, a few phrases that I pulled out uh, from the movie, and one was, "You don't have any secrets from the Department of Health." The Department of Health play a role in this, and like one of the characters works for the Department of Health. Phrases that are used: a hallucinatory flu, recombinant DNA, and I was like just scribbling notes furiously, thinking, "Oh my God!" You know, this was the time to watch this. While certainly for those of us who did a lot of coverage at the time, but the pandemic is still fresh in our minds, and the effects of it continue to roll on and roll out. Um, People are described as oblivious to the increasingly ominous signs of doom. Well, I mean, that sounds like it could be a news headline for today, tonight. Um, there's another phrase in it. There's just twin phrases that go together. They get you when you sleep, and that's how indeed in the film it does work. Uh, the seed pods begin to take over bodies when they sleep, and of course, no human can go very long without sleep. This is why sleep deprivation is such a horrible form of torture. You have to stay awake. Well, they get you when you sleep, and you have to stay awake. Just think about those phrases in terms of, you know, all the events of the first quarter of the 21st century here on Earth. And indeed, as the story unfolds, this need to stay awake, to literally not go to sleep amongst the main protagonists is played out, and they go to increasing lengths, including taking a load of speed, just in an effort to literally stay awake. Um, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers was very much about Reds under the beds, communist paranoia of the McCarthy era, and the comparison being the pod people as communist infiltrators. In this 1978 remake, it's very much about paranoia and disillusionment in the wake of Vietnam and Watergate, and also the counterculture, the ultimate failure of that. And indeed, many of the main characters in the film are like ex-hippies, and there's a strong critique of materialism here. They've bought into the American dream, so-called material society, but here we see the unraveling of that society and the undermining of trust, on a mass scale. And it's against that backdrop that we have the alien invasion story playing out. So the levels of like paranoia and mistrust and distrust um, reach just astronomical levels in the movie. And this is where the small town to city move comes in, because the small town setting is very effective um, place to tell many stories. There's that sort of claustrophobia, and everyone knows everyone else, but do they? So for this remake, they were talked about moving it to various cities, including Seattle, but they end up settling on San Francisco, and that was just perfect, kind of like home of the counterculture. And here we see all of that coming apart, and then, as if it wasn't enough what humans were doing to themselves, then death from above. Um, there's a number of really disturbing and very striking scenes in the film, and I think a couple of them are towards the end. And again, spoiler alert here, big time. There's a scene at a warehouse where a couple of the few remaining real humans, purebloods, see these pods being prepared on an industrial scale. And then there's a devastating scene down by the pier, the waterfront, when they see a large container ship. Oddly enough, Old Lang Syne playing on the bagpipes in the background for some example on the soundtrack. And they realize the container ship, which is heading out to international waters, is absolutely loaded with the pods, and the sense of disbelief and absolute despair is is palpable. And it's a little bit like Doc's realization in John Carpenter's 1982 film, The Thing, that if kind of this thing literally, if this thing gets out of here, if it gets out of Antarctica, gets into the world, it's within, within a few days, it's over. 48 hours, maybe, who knows? In the case of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, maybe a few weeks, couple of months, it's over. There's no way back. And that brings us really to the end of the film, which I won't mention what happens, but there's a moment there when it's like when you see the film for the first time, it's like, oh my God, I did not see that coming. You're wondering how on earth are they not, they must be doomed, these remaining people. What else can they do? And then there's this twist. So that's probably the most powerful moment the entire film. And once again, as with Lifeforce, but more so with this remake, um, parallels with recent and ongoing events, and yeah, just metaphors wall to wall, very, very effective ones. So I can't recommend this movie enough. Once again, it's the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the previous title we were looking at, of course, 1985, Tobe Hooper's Lifeforce. Okay, so that's all for today. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffitt, and you've been watching LegalizeFreedom.com.
LegalizeFreedom.com